On a morning in the year 625 AD, a merchant caravan was disappearing toward the Arabian coast. Inside it, silks from Syria, spices, gold coins, wealth that could sustain a community for months. 200 miles away, a small group of men sat in the desert, watching that same caravan's dust trail fade beyond the horizon. They had a choice to make, and it would change everything. One choice led to one of the most pivotal military engagements in world history. The other choice meant slow starvation. They chose forward. What they didn't know was that this single decision to pursue that caravan would reshape not just their own survival, but the entire trajectory of early Islamic history. And it would unleash a series of battles that tested their faith, their strategy, and their will to exist in a world that wanted them eliminated. This is the story of Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon him, most powerful battles. The confrontations that saved early Islam from extinction and transformed a persecuted minority into a civilizational force. But this is not a story of invincibility or easy triumph. It is a story of desperation, brilliant strategy, crushing defeats, recovery, and the kind of resilience that defies historical expectation. To understand these battles, you have to understand what was at stake. When Prophet Muhammad ﷺ arrived in Medina in 622 AD, after 13 years of persecution in Mecca, the Muslim community was not powerful. They were refugees. They had fled with almost nothing. The Quraysh, the merchants of Mecca who had resisted Islam, saw this migration as an opportunity, not a threat. Here was the man who had challenged their gods, their authority, their entire worldview. He was now safely out of their city. But what the Quraysh did not anticipate was that Medina transformed Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, from a persecuted preacher into a community leader responsible for the survival of thousands of people. And survival meant defense. Defense meant strategy. Strategy meant military engagement. The people of Medina, called the Ansar, meaning helpers, had made a covenant with the Muslim emigrants. They were now one community. They shared one identity. And together, they faced enemies on nearly every horizon. The Quraysh to the south, pagan Arab tribes to the east and north, and the Jewish tribes who lived within Medina's walls and viewed this new Muslim authority with skepticism. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, knew that his community could not survive passively. The first major collision came in the second year of the migration. A Quraysh merchant caravan was returning from Syria, led by Abu Sufyan, one of the most powerful men in Mecca. The caravan represented enormous wealth, nearly 50,000 dinars in gold and merchandise. For a struggling Muslim community that owned almost nothing, this caravan was not just trade goods, it was survival. But as news of this caravan reached Medina, something unexpected happened. The Quraysh, hearing that the Muslims were preparing to intercept the trade route, sent not merchants, but soldiers. A force of nearly 1,000 warriors marched north from Mecca, commanded by the Quraysh's greatest military leaders. Their mission, not to protect the caravan, but to destroy the Muslim threat once and for all. The Muslims gathered only 300 men. On the morning of the Battle of Badr, as the two forces approached each other across a narrow valley, the disparity was impossible to ignore. The Quraysh had superior numbers, superior armor, superior experience. Many of them were professional warriors. Most of the Muslims were farmers, merchants, and refugees who had never fought in organized battle before. And yet, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had positioned the Muslim force with extraordinary tactical precision. He had studied the terrain. He understood the advantage of controlling the water wells. He anticipated how the enemy would advance. When the armies collided, something extraordinary happened. The first combats were individual duels, the way Arabs fought traditionally. But as the engagement deepened, the Muslim force, though outnumbered, began to overwhelm their opponents. They moved together. They supported each other. They fought not for plunder or pride, but for the survival of everyone they loved. By the end of the day, 70 Quraysh warriors lay dead. The Muslims had lost only 14 men.
The Battle of Badr became legendary throughout Arabia. It was not simply a military victory. It was proof that the Muslims could survive against the greatest power in the peninsula. The victory was so stunning that people questioned whether it was possible. Some said divine intervention occurred. Others said it was brilliant strategy. The truth contained elements of both. But Badr was not the end of the conflict. It was the beginning of a much longer war. The Quraysh could not accept this humiliation. 2 years later, they returned with an army of 3,000 warriors. The Muslim force had grown, but they were still vastly outnumbered, 800 fighters against 3 times that number. The Battle of Uhud would test whether the courage and cohesion shown at Badr could survive a more experienced, better prepared enemy. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, positioned the Muslim force at the base of Mount Uhud to prevent the Quraysh from attacking from behind. He assigned 50 archers to hold the mountain pass with clear instructions: do not leave your position no matter what happens. The battle opened with the same pattern as Badr. The Muslims advanced, their discipline held. The Quraysh began to falter. Some of the younger Muslim fighters, seeing the enemy retreat, assumed victory was assured. They broke formation to pursue and claim the spoils of battle. In that moment, the Quraysh cavalry made a devastating counterattack. They wheeled around the mountain, and suddenly the Muslim army was surrounded. The archers, seeing this catastrophe unfold, abandoned their post to join the fighting. Without those archers defending the pass, the Quraysh cavalry poured through. What had seemed like a victory became a rout. The Muslims retreated in chaos. Prophet Muhammad himself was struck by an arrow. Many of his closest companions were killed. The Quraysh pursued the Muslim force mercilessly. But even in defeat, something extraordinary happened. The Muslim fighters regrouped. They formed a defensive circle. They fought fiercely enough that the Quraysh, despite their numerical advantage, did not pursue the battle to complete annihilation. They withdrew, believing they had sufficiently avenged Badr. Uhud was a crushing defeat, but it was not a destruction. The Muslim community survived, and more importantly, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, recognized the mistake that had cost them the victory. The discipline that had worked at Badr had broken at Uhud, when individual fighters chased personal glory instead of maintaining formation. That lesson would shape every battle that followed. 3 years after Uhud, the Quraysh planned their most ambitious offensive. This time, they did not march north alone. They gathered allies from across Arabia, pagan tribes, mercenary warriors, Bedouin clans. Their combined force numbered 10,000 warriors. Against them stood a Muslim force of roughly 3,000. The Quraysh planned to march on Medina itself, to lay siege to the city, to destroy the Muslim community once and for all. What they did not expect was that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had learned something crucial from his previous battles. Instead of meeting the enemy in open terrain, where numerical superiority decided outcomes, the Muslims dug a massive trench around Medina, a defensive fortification that would turn the battlefield into something unprecedented. The Quraysh and their allies had never encountered this tactic before.
It was not the way Arab armies fought. For 2 weeks, the two sides faced each other across the trench. The Quraysh cavalry could not cross it. The Muslim force, though smaller, was protected by it. Supply lines began to fail for the massive Quraysh alliance. Different tribes had different interests. They were not unified in purpose the way the Muslims were. Eventually, dissension broke the coalition. One by one, the allied tribes withdrew. The Quraysh, despite their overwhelming numerical advantage, were forced to retreat. They had marched north to destroy Medina. Instead, they returned to Mecca, defeated by a ditch and the unified determination of a community fighting for survival. This Battle of Khandaq, also called the Battle of the Confederates, proved something essential. Numerical superiority could be overcome by strategic innovation, environmental knowledge, and spiritual unity.
The following year brought another confrontation, this time at the fortress city of Khaybar. The fortress was home to a Jewish community that had entered into conflict with the Muslims over land, resources, and political allegiance. When diplomatic efforts failed, military action became necessary. The fortress at Khaybar was incredibly fortified. Multiple defensive structures, high walls, supplies for a long siege. The Muslim force approached with siege equipment and strategic coordination. After weeks of determined assault against each section of the fortress, Khaybar fell. The conquest was significant not because of the size of the force or the dramatic nature of individual battles, but because it expanded Muslim control over northern Arabian trade routes and eliminated a significant threat to Medina's security. It also demonstrated that the Muslim military capability had become sophisticated enough to conduct siege warfare, not just open field battles. 8 years after the initial migration to Medina, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his community made a journey back to the holy city they had been forced to abandon. They came not as refugees this time, but as a force that could no longer be ignored. The Quraysh initially prepared for battle, but as the Muslim force approached, now numbering 10,000 warriors, the reality of their situation became undeniable. The Quraysh could not defeat this army. Their choices had narrowed to one: negotiate or face destruction. And so the conquest of Mecca happened not through a devastating siege, but through a peaceful entry. The Muslims entered the holy city, established their authority, and dismantled the idols that had stood in the Kaaba for centuries. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, walked through the city where he had been mocked and persecuted for 13 years. He had the power to exact revenge. Instead, he offered clemency. He granted amnesty to those who had tortured his followers, who had driven him into exile. This was, perhaps, the most remarkable victory of all. A conquest not of violence, but of principle. The city that had rejected him was now his, and he chose mercy. The series of battles from Badr to Mecca tells a story that extends far beyond military history. It is a narrative about how an outnumbered, persecuted community survived through a combination of strategic intelligence, unwavering moral conviction, and the kind of unity that emerges when people share a common purpose larger than personal survival. The early Muslims lost battles. They experienced devastating defeats. They lost loved ones and endured years of uncertainty about whether their community would survive at all. But they refused to be eliminated. They adapted, they learned, they persevered. These battles did not just determine the survival of an early Islamic community. They shaped the course of world history. The same Muslims who fought at Badr and Khandaq
would, within a century, build one of history's greatest civilizations. They would establish centers of learning that preserved and expanded human knowledge through centuries when Europe was in turmoil. They would create art, architecture, science, and philosophy that still influences the world today. But it all began with desperate communities defending themselves in the Arabian desert, with strategic leaders who refused to accept defeat, and with ordinary people who believed that something worth defending was worth fighting for. The power of these battles lies not in their military tactics or the numbers of soldiers involved. Their power lies in what they represent. The triumph of an idea so compelling that no amount of opposition could permanently suppress it. If you want to explore more forgotten chapters of Islamic history and the civilizations that shaped our world, subscribe for the next documentary.